Hi, I want to thank everyone for coming to this TrackVia demo. Today we're going to show you how to take a spreadsheet and turn it into an app. My name is Tom Troy. I work here at TrackVia. I will start out the presentation and then I will hand it over to our manager of solutions consultants, Brandon Gill, to run us through the live demo. We want to start out here with some housekeeping. Everyone's in listen-only mode. You can submit questions via the chat window. We're actually recording this webinar, so if anyone missed out on this, we can get it out to you, and we'll follow up within 48 hours with the recording of the demo here. So let's get started. There's some major trends in the world today as far as digital transformation. We all know that we need digital transformation and it's a priority. So hopefully here we're going to show you how TrackVia can help with that. One of the issues with digital transformation is that there's a tech bottleneck. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says that by 2026, we could have a shortage of engineers. Really, the idea of digital transformation is to be more agile. If you're a more agile firm, you're going to grow, you're going to have higher profits, and hopefully we'll show you how to do that here with TrackVia. So what we want to talk about is how we can help with this digital transformation. So we're going to show you how to turn the how into who. Traditionally, apps have been built by development groups, whether that's IT or traditional developers by hand coding applications. But what we want to talk about is citizen developers. And if you haven't heard that term, you know what a citizen developer is. You have these folks in your organizations today. That could be a business engineer, process excellence personnel, data analyst, really someone who wants to get in and make changes to the process within the organization. So what we're showing you here is how we take, we go from low code or from code to a low code type platform like TrackVia. Really all it is clicks and drag and drop. You no longer need to code out an application by hand. And Brandon's going to show you that here in the demonstration. So what we're talking about here is really applications of significance. We're going to show you how to take a simple spreadsheet and turn it into an app in this presentation. But a lot of our customers use TrackVia in very significant apps in the organization, whether that's operations, compliance, field services, back office, and so on and so forth. Really, the sky's the limit with TrackVia. So the idea of this is to show you how to take a spreadsheet. A lot of people are managing their businesses with spreadsheets today, whether that's reporting, scheduling, purchase orders, so on and so forth. We're going to show you how to simply and quickly take a spreadsheet and turn it into an app. And more importantly, that app can be used on a traditional machine that you're probably sitting in front of today. But the cool thing with TrackVia is that all of this information is available on native mobile as well. So that's iOS or Android. So that could be your iPhone or tablet that you have within the organization. So with that, I want to turn it over to Brandon Gill. He's going to go ahead and run us through the demo and show us how we can make this work in your organization. Brandon, go ahead.
Great, thanks so much, Tom. And hi, everyone. It's great to have you all here with us today. So what we're going to be going through today is I'm going to talk to you about all of the main components of TrackVia and how we use these components in order to build these applications from spreadsheets from scratch with no coding required, as Tom has discussed thus far. Now, for this today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building an application around company requests. So you could think of this as a general application where maybe you request PTO time, maybe you're making IT requests, maybe you're requesting general office supplies, whatever the situation may be, we're going to do some company requests today. However, what you're looking on the screen right now is TrackVia, and it's an account that I use to demonstrate the abilities of the system and the tools of the system using common use cases that we typically hear. So what you're seeing is all of the different applications that I currently have in this account. So things like asset tracking, document routing, facilities auditing, inventory tracking. These are all common use cases for TrackVia, because at the end of the day, TrackVia is a platform that allows you to build any data tracking application that you might think of. I always tell people, anytime that you are going to be tracking data and then moving that data to different people or different departments, it is likely a good chance that TrackVia is a good solution for you to consider. And the beauty of the platform is because it's so flexible, oftentimes we are called on to replace existing systems or enhance existing processes, or sometimes we're called on to be a brand new system where there was not a system previously. So lots of different things you can do with TrackVia. Now, when you start to build an application in TrackVia, what you do is you hit this button here to create a new app. If you become a new customer at TrackVia, this is kind of how the experience is going to go. Now, of course, you can work with our implementation team and our professional services team, and they can help stand up a lot of these things for you, and they can work with you to really train you. But if you really want to just start from absolute scratch with TrackVia, this is how you get started. And you're going to see that I've got the ability to start using an Excel spreadsheet. So if you have some existing data, you can bring that in, or where you can start clean from scratch. And in my case, I'm going to start clean from scratch. However, in a couple of minutes, I am going to import a spreadsheet as well. So let's give our app a name. I'm going to call this Office Request App, and we'll hit next on that. When we do that, we are now taken into our new Office Request app. Now, if I hit the drop down here, you're still going to see all those other applications because I am currently logged in as a super admin in the system, and that's what gives me the ability to build everything I'm about to build. You can permiss the system accordingly, so you can limit people's abilities to look at certain apps, limit what they can do within those apps. There's a lot of different permissions we can give to folks, but for today's purposes, I'm going to be in a super admin role where I can build pretty much anything in the account. So what we have here is now I want to start to build out tables. So this across the top is our admin toolbar, and this is really where all the magic happens within TrackVia. We're going to build out different tables. We're going to create a relational database around these tables. We're going to construct different views so we can look at our data in different ways. We're going to construct forms so that we can actually capture that data in meaningful ways. We'll create dashboards so that our users have a good user experience with interacting with the system. We'll put filters on these views. We'll have different roles and permissions. So all of these things really come together to create an application within TrackVia. So let's start at the table level. In order to create a TrackVia application, underlying all these applications is a relational database made up of a series of tables where we have some data. Now, you'll notice we don't have any tables right now. I'm on the first table that we can start to create, but I want to actually bring in a Excel spreadsheet of different employees that might be at our fictitious company. So I've just opened up that spreadsheet just so you all can get a glimpse at what it looks like. Now, obviously, this is a pretty simplistic spreadsheet. You may have more complex spreadsheets, but the key indicator here is these headers are what are going to become fields within TrackVia, and then all of this data is going to be brought directly into the system so that we can start to take this spreadsheet and build an application around it. Now, I'm looking at employees here. Maybe in your case, you're looking at jobs or part numbers or inventory or materials or whatever the case may be, but the process is still the same to bring this information in. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start at the table level and I'm going to create a new table. I have the ability to do this from scratch, which is where we're going to just drag and drop different fields over into the table, or I can do it from import, which is where we're going to bring it in from an Excel file. We'll give a name to our file and thus our table. Let's call this our employees table. And then it'll ask us what you call a single item and a plural item in here. That's just kind of common database nomenclature. Now all I have to do is just take that Excel file that we just looked at, I'm going to drag it over and drop it into our import wizard. This is going to create a preview of the information that's going to be coming in. I have an ability to look at different error handling methods. Let's go ahead and hit next on that. And I can see how I want this information to come in. So this employee ID is going to come in as a number field. That's fine. Employee name is a single line. That's fine. Our date fields will come in as a date. And then our titles are currently coming in as a single line, but I'm actually going to change this to a drop down. So we have different field types you can use in TrackVia, and you can control these during the import process to make sure that it's coming in the way that you want it to. So I'm going to have these come in as a drop down. We'll hit next on that, and that is now going to import my file, and you can see my import results. I'll actually get an email with these import results as well, where I can see the table name, I can see the number of records added, and in this case, I had no issues with data validation or uniqueness errors. So I'll hit view my table, and now I can see the information is in TrackVia. These titles came in as a drop-down list, so I have the ability to change those. These dates came in as a date field, and I've got just generally all the information that we started with. Now, for me personally, I like to make some changes to the unique IDs on these tables. If you're familiar with database structure, unique IDs are basically what keeps the records unique so that you don't have duplicate records. And when it comes to something like an employees table where we're looking at names, I like to go beyond just the individual employee ID and include that name. So to do that within TrackVia, what I'll do is I'll hit my tables dropdown where I now see my employees table, and I can edit this table. This takes me to our table editor, which is where we started when we first created this application before we imported that spreadsheet. And I can see all the fields and the field types that were brought in via that spreadsheet. If I want to change the way these things are being displayed, you remember the employee ID had a comma with it. Maybe I want to say I don't want a separator. I just want it to show up as the number itself. And then I can change the actual unique ID here. And my best practice for this is just to have the employee ID. I like to put a little spacer in here, and then I include the employee name, and we'll save that. So now if I go back to that table, I can click in here and I get a nicer looking unique ID where I can actually see my employee IDs and I can see the individual names as well. So at a high level, what we've done is we've now brought in a set of data to start to create this application. We have employees data in here. We can add more information to this. We can, of course, add more employees. We'll cover that in a little bit more detail when we get into forms and things like that. But I want to build out the rest of my database as well, because at the end of the day, it's the underlying database structure that allows us to build these unique applications and then start to create dashboards and forms that help us move data from one place to another. So to do that, I'm going to go to my table relationships dropdown. And I've got two different options here. I can look at my entity relationship diagram or my ERD, which is just going to show me the database as it stands right now, which is just that one table. But I can also switch to a list type view where I can see all of my tables and I can start to set relationships here as well. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I will add a new table, and I'm just going to say we're going to build this one from scratch. The last one we imported. Now we'll take a look at how we build one from scratch. And I'm going to call this table my requests table, because remember, we are going to be an employee that is going to make certain requests to different areas of the business. I'll create that table here, and now I can see I've got my employees table with the different fields in it, and I have my requests table. Now I want to set up a relationship between these two things, and the simple way to do this, if you're unfamiliar with the way databases typically come together, is I want to think about employees may make many requests. So that's a one-to-many relationship. An individual request will only be tied to one employee, but an employee can make as many requests as they want. So what I'll do is I'll add a relationship to the employees table, and I'll say a record from employees has many records from the requests table. So now if we take a look at that ERD type view, it starts to look a little more like a database. Now it's a pretty simple database for our purposes today, but what we have are employees can submit many requests, and this will become very important as we build out the rest of our application. Now, when I'm building these applications, a best practice I like to use is I like to think of these tables as active or passive tables. And what I mean by that is if I think about employees, I'm going to add a set of employees. In fact, we've already done that with our spreadsheet. And maybe I'll add some other employees over time. Eventually, we'll have some new people work for us, things like that. But my real workflow is going to happen at this requests table. This is where I'm going to be adding the most of the data. This is where I'm going to be moving the data around. This is really the core table that I'm going to be working with. So I think of the employees table as the passive table. I really don't need to do a whole lot with that, but every once in a while I'll add something. And my requests table is what I think of as our active table. This is where we're really going to be collecting a lot of data and moving it between different folks. So What I would typically do is I would start by adding field types to our passive tables and build all those out and then move to my active tables. In our case, we already have information rather in our passive table in that employees table. So I'm going to instead start by building out our requests table. To do that, I'm going to go back to our table editor. So if I go up to the tables drop down here, I can go to requests and I can hit this pencil button to edit it. Now I'm always going to be started off with an auto counter field. This is what's going to give us our unique ID within this table. I like to change this usually and call this something like a request ID, something like that. And then we can just start to add in the field types that we think will be needed for different types of requests. So for example, I'm probably going to want to know the date and time this request came in. So we can call this request date and time. I may want to have some notes that I am including. So maybe a paragraph field of notes for request. And all I'm doing here is I'm thinking, what information do I want to collect on this table? And I'm simply grabbing the relative field type and dragging it over and including it on the table. So this is that drag and drop functionality that makes TrackVia very accessible to citizen developers. I don't need to code to do any of this stuff. I just have to think of the data structure, bring it over, and start to build out this table. So let's add a few more things here. Maybe we collect an image. We could say, photo if necessary. Maybe we don't always need a photo, but depending on what we're looking at, maybe that could be helpful. Maybe I can include a document type field. If I need to include like a PDF or something like that, we can have a document. And I'll just say this is if necessary as well. Maybe I want a drop-down list, and this drop-down list might say, what kind of request is this? Is this a request for PTO? Is this an IT ticket? Is it maybe, here, let me change that to say IT, there we go, ticket. Is it office supplies? And we can add as many of these as we want. I'm going to stick to these three for the purposes of today. But you can see how we can start to build out this information. Now, what you're not going to see is the actual employees field. That's because that's a relationship type field that will show up on the form, but we don't necessarily need to see it here. Now, the other thing that's important when we're building an app within TrackVia is to think about how this table will be used for each of our individual users. So if I think of our initial user, it's an employee who's going to be making a request. So what information do they need to put in? I think we've captured it. I think we've got a good sense of what's being captured: request date and time, the notes, the photos, the documents. We could always add more fields if it's a PTO type request. Maybe we need to know what days off they need and things like that. We can build this out to whatever level of detail we need. However, it's also important to think about the next person in this request. So if I'm going to submit an IT ticket, for example, my IT team needs to be able to see all of this and then approve it, deny it, ask for more information, do whatever they might need to do. So I might want to include some additional fields for later on in the workflow, something like a drop-down list for request approval. And we'll give it the option of approve request or deny request. I might also want a request status. So maybe it's going to go through a status of pending to in review to closed out, whatever the case may be. So let's have a request status, and we'll say it's pending, it's in review, and it is archived, just depending on where we're at in that process and who's looking at it. Okay, so now I think we've got a pretty good looking table here. So we've got our employees table, which has a series of employees. We now have a requests table. Of course, we can always add to this later if we want to, but this should give us a good sense of some general information we're going to capture in this application. So let's hit save on that. And again, you'll notice there was no coding required. Very easy to make changes to this, very easy to add new fields. If I think of another field 5 minutes from now, I can just come back in here and add it. So it's designed with that citizen developer in mind. So in my case, now that I've got my table set up, for me, the next best practice is to start building out forms. So if I go to my forms dropdown, forms in TrackVia are separated out by the tables that are in the database. So you'll see I have an option for employees forms and an option for request forms. Now we give you a default form here, so this is just going to have all of the field types that you could have on this given table, but frankly in my mind this doesn't have a really great user experience. So I'm going to want to make some different forms and permiss these forms accordingly so that people can really see information in a more appealing way. So to do that, I'm going to use my forms and I'm just going to hit to add a new form on the employee side. Now, best practice for us here at TrackVia is regardless of the table, we always want to have a new form. So a form where we're going to add information to it, and a summary form. A summary form might be something where we click in and we can get an overall view of our employees. Maybe we see all the requests that they've made, things like that. We can of course have as many forms as we want, but in general, you want at least a new form and a summary form. So let's build that out. So let's start on the employee side. Let's just say a new employee will be this form. And when we think about adding a new employee to the system, the employee ID is going to be auto-populated. So I don't necessarily need to include that in the form, but I will want the employee name. Maybe I want the start date for the employee, and I want their title. Now you'll see that I've got this here. It says date, start date. If I want to change the actual title on any of these fields, I can simply click into here and I can add a new title to it. So let's just call this simply start date instead of date start date. And it'll just update on the form. I can give these forms a title as well. So let's just call this employee information. And then I can even give a color to this form so it looks a little bit nicer and it's a little more appealing. All right, now let's hit save on that. So now we have that new employee form. Now, the next thing I typically like to do is I like to have a summary form as well. And in my case, if I think of an employee summary form, a great thing that we might want to be able to see is employee information, and I might want to see all of the different requests that have happened as well. So we can see the person's name, we can see the start date, we see the title, but we also want to see all the requests they've made over time. So to do this, let's make a new form. Now, I don't want to recreate everything I just did. I don't want to have to drag over all those fields. So what I can do is I can simply hit save as, and we'll just call this form employee summary. When I hit save as on that, it's now going to create a new form, but it keeps all the original formatting that I have from that new employee form. And what I can do is I can add what we call a view section. And if I go to my child views, I can see that because my requests is a child table to my employees, I have the ability to drag over the requests view and put this into here. So now when I look at my employee summary, I'll see the employee information, and I'll also see all the requests they've made at all times. So let's just call this requests. And again, I like to add a little color here so it looks a little more appealing. And we'll hit save on that. So now we have two forms under our employees. Let's simply do the same type of thing for our requests. And I'll do this a little bit quicker here. But for the request side of things, we're going to want a form that is a new request. And we can build this out to say request info. And give it a color as well. There we go. So now we can see on the left-hand side, these are all the fields that I can use to build out this request. And you'll notice this field here that we didn't have on the table, that is our employees. This is that relationship type field that we set up when we actually built the database. So we had our employees, and employees have many requests. So I can now include that here so I can say which employee is making this request. So let's just drag that over and drop that in place. Additionally, I can just fill in the rest of this here. So a request date and time, maybe some notes. I'll put these down here, and you can change these. You can make these fields bigger, make them smaller. Maybe I want my employees field to take up half the space, and the request date and time to take up half the space. I can include the photo if necessary. I can make this a little bit bigger. I can include a document if necessary, and we can make these things show hide. We can make these required fields. There's a lot of different things we can do here. We could even go as far as to put a signature on here if we wanted to verify that I'm the one doing the request. I'm also going to put down in here what type of request is it, our request approval. Actually, our request approval I'm going to save for another form here, but let's put our request status down here so we can see what type of request is this and our request status. Now the request approval I'm going to save for another form, which is going to be that approver form where they're going to see all this same information, but maybe now they have access to the approval drop down. So again, we're thinking of that workflow from the perspective of the initial person putting in the request and the person who's going to be approving or denying that request. So we have this form created. Now, when we're building out these forms, it's also important to note that we can change the abilities at the field level as well. So for example, for my request date and time, this is going to render as a date and time field, and I'm going to be asked to put in the exact date and time for when I'm making this request. But if we think about the user experience and we think about how we want this person to interact with it, it'd probably be easier if we just had them press a button to enter a new request and this date and time field was already pre-populated. Well, what we can do is we can click into the date and time field and we can set a default value. And if we set that default value to now, then it will just default to whatever time they hit that button. So it saves our users a little bit of time, a little bit of energy, and just makes their user experience a little bit better. And even through all these form builds, while we're making things defaulted, and I'm going to show some potential show hide rules and things like that, note that there's no coding happening. We're still in that citizen developer mindset of, I know how the data should work, I know how I want it to look, but I don't need to be a programmer in order to make this come to life. Okay, so now that we've got some information here, let's add a couple of other things. Let's default our request status, for example, to pending. So whenever I hit that button, this field's already going to be filled in as pending. And then I have all these other fields that I think we'll just leave as they are for now. And we'll hit save on that. Now let's make another form, and in this case, we're going to think of the form from the perspective of the approver. So we're going to include that request approval field. So again, we'll just hit save as, and let's just call this a request approval form. Hit save as on that. It renders the same form. But now what I can do is I can add a field section here. So this is just breaking up the form a little bit. And I'll call this my approver section. And on the approver section, all I'll do is I'll take that request approval and I'll put it down here. And what'll happen if I hit save on this is it'll make this request approval field kind of extend all the way up to the other side of the screen. So what I'll do is I'll add a spacer in here just so it looks a little bit nicer in the UI. So now we've got two different forms, one where our requesters can actually fill in and put their request in, one where our approvers can look at these and approve it or deny it or do whatever they may do with it from this point. So that kind of gives us a nice summary of what's going to happen with our requests. So now we've got these forms that we can start to work with. Next, what I'll want to do is I will want to start to assign these forms to different individuals within TrackVia. So this is where our roles and permissions starts to come into play. Now, roles and permissions can be a little bit tricky to figure out. We've got some great courses that cover them on TrackVia University. So if you are a current customer, I encourage you to check that out. And if you're not a current customer yet, definitely feel free to reach out to Tom or myself or anyone else at TrackVia, and we can get you set up in TrackVia University. We can go through this in more detail with you, or we're always happy to hop on the phone and go through some more information for anyone that wants to have a more private session after this webinar. But all that being said, let me step into my roles. Now I have one defaulted role, and that's what we're going to work off of in this case. Now with TrackVia, you can make as many roles as you want. You can permiss people however you want to permiss them. In my case, I'm in as a super admin right now, so I can really see everything in the system. But you'll see with these roles, we can make people limited users, so they might only have access to certain views and forms and things like that. We can make them app admins so that they can make changes in the system. There's a lot of different things we can do here. In my case, I'm going to set this as an app admin, and I'm going to place myself in this user role so that I can see things from the perspective of this app admin. And what I can do is if I had dashboards, I could add these dashboards here. We'll do that here in just a few minutes. But now what I can do is I could look at these tables and it'll have some basic information for me. So when we want to create a new employee record, let's use the new employee form that we had just created. Same thing with the views. We can make a lot of different views, and we will do that over the next 15 minutes or so. But in my case, I just have a default view. So let's include that and say when we look at the default view, let's look at the employee summary form. And same thing with our requests. Let's use our new requests. And then when we do that, let's also use the request approval, and that'll kind of serve as our summary. Of course, we could do more of these, but for the time that we have, let's just use our request approval form. And we'll hit save on all of that. All right. So now that we've got all this in place, we can start to think about how we want the users to interact with these things. So how do we want them to look at the dashboards? How do we want them to interact with the actual system itself for our application that we're building out? Now, I do want to make sure we save some time for questions, and we scheduled a 45-minute demo. So for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to move a little quickly through some of this, but it should give you a good sense of how we build out the rest of the application. So I'm going to start by actually creating a flow. And if I think about how I want my user to create a request, what I likely want them to do is press a button, take them to that request form, fill out that request form, and then submit it, and they're done. Now, Flows is a great tool for this because what Flows does is it allows a user to walk through a series of steps, and those steps could be forms, they could be views, they could be a host of different things in TrackVia, and it walks them through it without them even realizing they're being moved through different areas of the system. So let's make a new flow, and let's just call it new request. And all I have to do here is I can say, let's make a new task. I have a starting point for my flow, and this one's going to be really simple. I'm going to hit the start button. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a new request. And I'm going to do this with our new request form, and then I will end the flow. Now, I'm making a flow in this case because what I want to do is I now want to build out some dashboards for my users so that they have a place to go and see this information and start to enter their requests. So now that we've got a flow, we've built out some forms, we've built out some tables, we're going to build some views here in just a second, but let's start to build out some dashboards. Now, a dashboard is really where the users are going to land on. It's where they're going to see the UI in action. It's how they're going to interact with TrackVia. So I like to give the dashboards names that make sense for our end users. So let's just call this an employee request dashboard. And on this, let's just add our new request flow button. So this is just going to be a nice big flow button that tells people if you have a new request, hit this button and it'll kick off the workflow for you. And we'll hit save on that. And now we have a dashboard. So now we actually have a place where employees can start to see this information. Now let's make a couple of views so that we could add these to our dashboard. So if we want to look at views, views really allow us to see data in a lot of different ways. We have some specialty type views like calendars and lanes and timelines and things like that. We also have more grid type views, which look more like an actual table. We're going to make a little bit of both here today. I want to start at this request table, and I'm just going to start by making a request summary view. So when we make an initial view, we have all of the different fields that are on that table available to us. I'm going to remove some of these, again, just for a better user experience. And I'm just going to call this request summary. And on this, I can start to see different requests. Let's maybe remove the request ID as well. And this is just going to give us a nice overview of all the requests that have come in. And we'll hit save and finish on that. And now this is something we can add to our dashboard if we want to. Or what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this to add a new view. And I'm going to call this our calendar of requests. And what I'm going to do with this type of view is I'm actually just going to create a calendar type view. So if we go down here, you can see some of these specialty type views that we have. Let's create a calendar view where our start date's the request date and time, the end date's the request date and time. I can apply filters if I want. And let's just say I want this to be a calendar. So this will actually show us when we've put these requests in. Maybe I want to view it by employee. I want to view it by type of request. And maybe I want to view it by request status. So we'll hit save on that. Alrighty, so we don't have any information in these yet, but let's go ahead and add these two views onto our dashboard. And all we have to do that, again, is go to our view types, where we're able to add in our calendar type view, and we'll add in our request summary view. And as we start to add data to this, these will start to populate. We'll hit save on that. So now we've got a dashboard. The dashboard is starting to come to life a little bit. What I want to do now is I want to make another dashboard thinking about who the approver might be. So maybe this is a boss if it's a PTO type request. Maybe it's an IT person if it's an IT type request. So how do I want those users to interact with the system? Well, I think what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show you how to build some views with some filters to show IT type requests. Now, really quickly, I want to put in some dummy data here so that I can actually see the information and make sure it's working correctly. So let's go ahead and enter a new request. When I hit that flow button, it's going to take me to that form that we created and that we permit to show up here, where I can fill in some basic information. So who's the employee filling this in? The request date and time is defaulted in this case. I can put in some notes if I have any. I can include photos. I can include documents. For example, if I wanted to drop a PDF in here, I could. I could say what type of request is this. Let's say in this case, it's a PTO request, and we're just going to leave it as pending as the status. I hit save changes on that, and now that request is available for me to view, and I can see it down here in the calendar view. Now let's also quickly make another request, and let's actually have this be an IT request. Let's just say I need a new computer, whatever the case may be here. I can include photos, so maybe I have a photo of my computer, maybe I include a document, and let's just say this is an IT ticket. And we'll hit save changes on that. And I'm just putting some of this dummy data in here to make sure that it's flowing correctly, and so far it looks like it is. So let's make another dashboard. And in this case, I want my dashboard to be for my IT ticket approver. Now, what I'm going to have on this dashboard is maybe I've got a series of shortcut buttons, maybe I've got some flows, maybe I've got a lot of things, but really all I'm going to do for the purposes of the time we have left is create a view where we can see IT tickets that need approval. So we're just going to hit save on this dashboard for now. We're not going to put anything on it for the time being. And what we'll do is let's create a new view. Let's base it off of our request summary, and let's make a view where all we see is our IT ticket request. So I've got two requests here. I've got an IT ticket and PTO. Let's set up something so that our IT team doesn't see PTO, they only see IT requests. Now, if we want to do that, what we can do is we can hit this button here to create a new view. And let's just call this view IT ticket requests, because this is for our IT team. And I'll actually make a new filter on this as well. If I hit this filters tab, it allows me to build a new filter. And on this filter, I'm going to call it the same name as the view that it's on. That's just a best practice we have here at TrackVia. And what I'll do is I'll come down to this, what kind of request is it? I'll drag this over and drop it in place. And I'll say anytime that a request has the option IT ticket, that's what I want to show up in this view. So if I preview this filter, what I'm going to see is there's my one IT ticket request. I can't see the PTO request. I'm just going to see requests relevant to me. Now, again, with all of this, I'll sound like a broken record here, but none of this is requiring any coding, just dragging and dropping, creating these views, creating these filters, building out this user experience as a citizen developer. So now I have an IT ticket requests view, and I can hit save and finish on this. And now if I go back to my IT ticket approver dashboard, I can just take this and add it onto here and hit save. So now as an IT ticket approver, when I log into TrackVia, I can see any requests that are coming into my queue, and I can start to work off of these things. Now, a couple of other different things that we can talk about in the last couple of minutes is things like conditional formatting. So if I wanted to conditionally format this, maybe I want to say if my request status is pending, it shows up in green. If it's approved, it shows up in, or if it's rejected, it shows up in red. We can add things like that to TrackVia. We can add chart type views to TrackVia so we can see what's the most common request type we have, how many requests have we gotten this month, things like that. So there's a lot of different things that we can show in order to create that user experience and gather some of that data. Now, the other thing that I do want to show off as well is we have everything on the mobile device as well. So as we've been building, everything that we've built over the last 30 minutes or so, we've built a fully comprehensive application that allows us to enter these requests and send them to different folks. All of this is also becoming available to me on a mobile device. So if I drag over this mobile device that I've got sitting here, this is an iPad that I've got sitting on my desk in front of me. Now, if you're already a TrackVia customer, you're likely already familiar with this, but if you're not a customer yet, I'll give you the quick rundown. We're available on both iOS and Android in a fully native mobile application. So if I hit the drop-down list here, let's go ahead and get rid of this if I can. Sorry about that. This thing always pops up at the most inconvenient times. And let's just enter a new one real quick. Oh man, this thing is just the worst, isn't it? Well, that's a shame. Looks like we're going to have to kind of back out of this a little bit on the mobile device piece. But essentially what's going to happen here is all of the all of the features that we had on the web are fully available to us on mobile. We can enter those employee requests. We can see all of the information that came out. We could look at charts. We can even take advantage of the capabilities of the mobile device. So for example, if I wanted to see things like capturing photos, doing location capture, barcode scanning, we can do all of that on the mobile device, and anything that we build on the web will automatically be available. Additionally, we have the ability to do offline capabilities on mobile. So if we want to capture any information in an offline setting and then add it on and then sync it up to the database later, we can do that within TrackVia. But what we now have is a fully comprehensive application. We can start to build more off of this. We can add more people to it. We can add more users to it. And we've completed all of this in about 30 minutes or so. Now, of course, this is not the perfect application. There's always more things we can do, but hopefully this gives everyone a good sense of how easy it can be to build in a low-code environment and how quickly you can stand these things up, because that's really what the benefit of low-code is. It's a quicker time to value, it's a quicker time to stand up these solutions, and it's easier for business users and the people that are actively doing this work to create these applications and get them moving to streamline your processes. Now we've got 4 minutes left, and we do have a couple of different questions in the chat here that I want to make sure we get to. Any questions we don't get to, we'll be sure to email everybody out afterwards, but let's go ahead and answer a couple of these. Now, before we get to the questions, I will also offer up, if you're seeing anything today and you want to talk to someone in more detail, of course, you can reach out to Tom, you can reach out to myself. Our emails are pretty simple. It's just firstname.lastname@trackvia.com. So if you have any questions we don't get to, you can feel free to email me at brandon.gill@trackvia.com or tom@tom.troy@trackvia.com. Now, a couple of these questions we'll get to. One of them is, how do we integrate to other systems within TrackVia? Is there a simple way I can do this, or how am I able to integrate to things like my accounting system? That's a great question. It's a very common question that we often get at TrackVia. And the simple answer to that question is we can absolutely integrate to your other core systems. We have an open and bi-directional API here at TrackVia. So if your systems have an API on their end, it's very easy to connect those two systems to bring data into TrackVia or to push data out of TrackVia into that other system. Additionally, we work with an integrations partner called Workato. We are one of the only OEM partners that they have, so we're able to pass their services off to our customers, and that creates more of a drag and drop type integration feel. So they have set up a store of over 300 different connectors that we are able to access in order to build integrations with this same kind of citizen developer mentality that we take on at TrackVia. So you can drag over a connector to SAP, drag over a connector to TrackVia, match up the fields from TrackVia into SAP, build out that integration, and you're good to go. So just a couple different ways you can do that. And of course, you can bring in spreadsheets like we saw here. So if you want to extract data out of one system and bring it into TrackVia, that's a pretty straightforward process as well. Additional questions here about the mobile capabilities, and I do apologize for not being able to show that in more detail. Can we custom brand the TrackVia mobile app? The simple answer there is yes. So we do offer white labeling on the mobile app. So if you go to download the app right now, you can go to the iOS store or the Google Play store and just type in TrackVia, and you'll see a TrackVia symbol, and that's the TrackVia app. And if you're a customer, you can use your login to access that. However, if you wanted to custom brand that, we do have the ability to custom brand it so it doesn't have a TrackVia logo. It might have your organization's logo, and we can actually extract all of the information that says TrackVia, so it will not have our branding anywhere in that app. It will look completely like it is your application. In addition to that, I didn't cover this on the web, but it's important to note, we can also white label the web. So we can put your organization's logo in the top left-hand corner. We can put a custom URL up there that looks and feels like it is your organization's URL. So lots of different ways that we can make this experience look and feel like it is your own. I think we've got time for one final short question. We've got a few of them here, but let's see. Here's a good one. Do you have any type of development environment in TrackVia, i.e. if I want to build some things and test them before I send them to my users, is that possible? It's a great question. It's a very common question because if you think of a traditional development platform, there is that dev type environment, but with TrackVia, we're not traditional. It is designed for citizen developers. It's not designed for traditional coders. But the short answer to that is yes. We do have a sandbox environment that will allow you to make an exact copy of your application and work with it, test it, do anything you want there. And you can also make those promotable. So it does not affect any of your production applications unless you were to promote that. And then you can promote that and it will affect all of your production apps to have all of the changes that you may have made. So that serves as kind of your dev environment when you're working within the system. All right, I'm looking at the time here. We're right at about 12:45, which is our scheduled time. So I do want to thank everybody for attending. I apologize once again on the mobile side of things, but if you have any questions or want a more tailored demo or want a more private conversation with myself and other members of the sales staff, feel free to reach out. Any other questions that we get, we'll be sure to email those out as well. Thanks, everyone.